This is specially produced so one can tap the microphone. Good evening, welcome to all of you. I think we've got people in the overflow as well, so welcome to them as well. I am required, I don't know what I'm required by, but I'm required to tell people what to do when there's a fire, and you do that. So you read it first and you go to the George Hotel and you wait till the fire's over. Much more important, I require myself to say, please, could you switch off any mobile phones, because it does slightly disrupt things. Before I get on to the main business of the evening, we have a little bit of, right side of Edinburgh, business to conduct, and it is essentially this. That is, every new fellow signs the roll. I think they pay their subscription, and then they're admitted as a fellow. And Dr. Victoria Crowe, who is an artist and a printmaker of great reputation, and will be known to many people in this room, could not sign the roll before when we did a sort of general admissions about a year ago, so we'll be signing the roll now and will be admitted if we have a roll. Yes. Come and sign first. There's probably got more place. Yeah, that's you. Pleasure to have here, if I can find all my notes in the right place, Professor Allison, who is an Emeritus Professor of the University of Oxford and also an Emeritus Fellow of Keble College. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry. Because what I wanted to say was something of the background for those who don't know him. He went first of all to another university called Cambridge, where he studied for a degree in natural sciences and part 3 of mathematics, and then came to Oxford and has spent some 40 years in Oxford. His earlier research was in high-energy physics, and particularly a radiation field of relativistic particles. But his interests, his expertise, has spread very much since then into medical physics and to the whole wider idea of explaining science to a wider audience. A lot of publications one could list. Let me just mention one particular and then another one. One being Fundamental Physics for Probing and Imaging, and then come on to his latest publication, which is Radiation and Reason, the Impact of Science on a Culture of Fear. And I mentioned that he is an Emeritus Fellow of Keble College, Oxford, which gives me particular pleasure because I happen to be an Honorary Fellow of Keble College, Oxford. So for every possible reason, Professor Allison is very welcome here to talk on radiation and reason, straight and open thinking about choosing nuclear. And there will be a talk and then there will be a chance for questions and answers. Professor Allison, over to you.
I'm not quite sure where my notes have gone. They were. There they are. Thank you, Lord Wilson, for my notes and the introduction. It's a great honour for me to address this famous society this evening, and I have quite a lot to say. It seems to me it's the business of science not only to inspire especially the young and inflame them with new ideas and things for the future, but also every now and then to warn and inform and actually look at some difficult problems. Adam Smith, the famous Scottish economist, said, "Science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition." And I think today there is no subject which generates more superstition in our civilization than our attitude the general attitude to anything nuclear and anything to do with the word radiation. And we have seen, unfortunately, a lot of reaction of this kind to recent events in Fukushima. Cautionary tales are somewhat neglected, I think, today, and I think perhaps we should go back to some of them. I was brought up on cautionary tales of the 19th century of a German origin, in particular about the dangers of fire, Harriet and the matches, and I expect many of you in the audience are familiar with this story. What is particularly interesting about this today is to realize that this actually pinpointed the wrong danger. It's not just the spread of fire which caused the poor Harriet to her death. It's something else, and that is what we need, one of the things we need to talk about. The atmosphere of the Earth is incredibly small. It may be gaseous, but it's equivalent of 10 meters of water over the surface of the Earth. It's very, very small. And this transparency shows how, is this a, I'm going to see whether it, yes. This transparency shows how over the last 160,000 years the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up and down, hither and thither, depending in part on ice ages and for other reasons. In the last 1,000 years it was pretty constant. This is on now 200 times the time scale, so this is very accelerated. And then in the last 200 years, the concentration of carbon dioxide started to rise extremely rapidly. And if you look in the last 20 years, that's 8,000 times this time scale, so it should be almost constant, and it isn't. It's rising rapidly every year. Now, if this doesn't cause climate change, most scientists want to know why. We do observe some climate change, and we don't know the cause, and putting these two things together seems very obvious, but we don't know all the truth of the matter yet, and there may be a lot more to learn, but I think most of us believe that there is a problem with climate change. There are, of course, many solutions. And one solution is to use nuclear power, as well as renewables, because like all very serious problems, it should be pursued by approaching all possible solutions in parallel with one another. So I'm not against windmills or tidal power or anything, but I'm very much in favour of nuclear power, and this is why. The per kilogram of fuel, and therefore per kilogram of waste, you get 1,000,000 times as much energy as you do with fossil fuel. And we'll see in the next slide what that means. The waste, of which I'll talk more in a minute, is not released. It doesn't go into the atmosphere. It doesn't even go into the water. Most of it sits there waiting for somebody to do something about it in more or less solid form. The fuel supplies are available from a lot of places in the world. They're not all politically unstable and unreliable sources as we have with fossil fuels. The effect on climate change is essentially nothing. The output is high. It's available anytime, anywhere, including regions of very high population density where perhaps the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Renewables, of course, are typically available in very windy places, and solar power is available in the daytime, and so renewables have a problem of providing a high output everywhere all the time. The technology, I won't go into all the technologies, but there are a lot of different technologies. Many of them can be shown to be safe, and there are other ones which can be developed for the future which will give certain advantages. But they don't contain a lot of unknowns, like the problem of capturing CO2, which is something which has really not been demonstrated on a sufficiently large scale to be reliable. They're compact. Compared with wind farms, which cover large areas of the countryside, a small nuclear power station covers just a few acres and has a small impact on the environment in that sense. The health impact, well, that is mainly what I want to talk about, the many fears and concerns that we have there. Let me talk about waste, just as an example. Let's look about wastes, plural. The waste per person per day in the UK. The CO2 waste from the use of fossil fuels represents about 30 kilograms per person per day. It's probably driving climate change, and when such fire gets out of control, we're familiar with the fact that fire is a thermal chain reaction which certainly kills thousands of people every year up and down the country. We've learnt to face this problem, but it's nevertheless true. The next waste that we're familiar with from the nursery is human biological waste. And for that we produce about 2 kilograms per person per day. Most of this goes into the environment, may get into water, and when it does, as we're all familiar, it typically causes disease when it's not under control, and millions of deaths in the world per year come from the problem of coping with human biological waste. Where does nuclear waste come on this scale? These, incidentally, are proportional to the mass of the waste. Here, with a 4,000th of a kilogram, is a tiny little canister. The nuclear waste, as I say, comes out as solid. It can go into the ground. It can be buried in the ground. There are lots of questions there to do with how you do it, but so there are with human waste. And the number of deaths per year essentially comes down to 50 deaths over the last 50 years from the Chernobyl incident, and I'll be talking a lot more about that, but it's very small compared with these problems. So if nuclear technology is such a good thing, and it's all been misunderstood, what is the problem? And the problem is fear. Why are people frightened of nuclear radiation? And the first reason is that because of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the fear of a nuclear holocaust from the time of the Cold War, and so people have been brought up, we were all brought up, this is how the Cold War worked after all, we were all learnt to be frightened of nuclear. Simon Jenkins in The Guardian, reviewing my books, said, "Nothing is as potent as the politics of fear, and there is no fear as blind as that which comes from a bomb and a death ray." And that is true. But it may not be justified. We have to ask just whether there is what the truth is behind this fear. The next reason we're wary of nuclear radiation is it's invisible and you can't feel it. Well, you can't see in a dark room. And in a dark room, What do? You turn the light on, or you go and find a torch. There is no reason why people shouldn't have with them a simple, cheap radiation detector to reassure them whether there is or isn't any nuclear radiation. Here I've got a little radiation detector the size of a credit card. If this was mass-produced, it could be very cheap indeed. The technology of this basically is available in every domestic smoke alarm, which in fact involves a radiation detector. So we can and should, as a civilization, provide radiation detectors to reassure people. But there's better news than that, because as we will see, the cells of our body, we may not be able to feel radiation, but the cells of our body can, and they're the ones that get hit by the radiation. And as we will see, and I will show you evidence, which you will know about, there's evidence that cells repair the damage that radiation causes to those cells, and even that they're able to take some evasive action for future radiation exposure. So there's good news on the can't see business, and we'll explore some of those things further later. The next reason is that there are regulations out there that warn that radiation is dangerous. And I'm going to criticize that very heavily indeed, and we'll look and see what those regulations ought to say and what they do say and what the consequences are. And fourth, all too readily at the end of the Second World War, it was thought that this very powerful new technology was too frightening, understood only by exceptionally clever people sitting in bunkers somewhere you didn't know quite where, and it did not build confidence in the population that they too could understand about nuclear radiation. And it's not very difficult, and my book is my attempt to get across the simple ideas that go into nuclear radiation and why we shouldn't be afraid of it. Of course, this is all tied up with the obsession with safety and risk in modern society, and I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time on this. One thing is certain. Well, it's not quite on the. That's meant to say 100% circle. We will all die sooner or later. So, representing a chance of 100% that we're all going to die in the end anyway, what sort of risks do we have? This little green circle is the fraction of people in the world who live within 5 meters of sea level, and that is just to remind you that the climate change business could, in fact, have a rather serious effect on people's lives. But most people in the world are likely to die from cancer or heart disease or one or two other things. Here's suicide, which is 1 in 67. That's a US figure. 1 in 7, that's a worldwide figure. These vary a bit from one nation to another. But if we want to look at really small risks, we're going to have to blow up, expand this little risk, which is 1 in 1,000, and look at it on 1,000 times expansion. And on this scale, the chance of picking 3 people and finding that the second person was born on the day after the first one and the third one was born on the day after the second one, that has a chance of 1 in 133,000. That's pretty unusual. that is the kind of scale of what a 1 in 100,000 risk looks like. And here are some other risks. The fraction of the world's population that was killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki from the blast and the fire was about 1 in 40,000. Here is the chance of being killed by lightning in the USA. Here's the chance of being killed in an air accident, which is now getting pretty small. But if we want to look at even smaller risks, we're going to have to play this game again. And this green circle represents the chance of picking two people at random and finding that they're both born on the 29th of February, which is pretty small. In fact, it's 1 in 2.1 million. And on that scale, the chance of being killed by radiation-induced cancer at Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a similar sort of number, and the number of being killed in a nuclear power reactor accident is about 1 in 150 million. It's quite a lot smaller than that. So on this scale, these are the kinds of ways that we should look at things and realize how incredibly small these risks are. Now, there's only one important question that has to be answered, and that is, what is the effect of radiation on life? Is it dangerous, or isn't it? And how dangerous is it? To answer that question, we're going to need to understand what happens when radiation impacts on human cells, and we're also going to need some data which shows that our understanding is right. Now, in the decades after the Second World War, the biology was not in a good enough state to say that we did understand it, and we certainly didn't have the data to check it out. So we weren't able to answer this question. But now we both have the data and we have the understanding. When we have that understanding, when we can answer that question, we can then go on to further questions. First of all, at a national level, what are the risks? What is the question? What is the public acceptance? What should the safety regulations be? Working practices, how long should people work on radioactive substances? What are we going to do about waste, and what about the costs of all of this provision of care? And then finally, at the international level, between nations, there's the question of rogue states and terrorists and dirty bomb threats and nuclear blackmail. Now, for instance, when it comes to terrorists and nuclear blackmail, assuming that they're not going to explode the nuclear weapon, which is pretty unlikely, they're more likely to threaten to spray a lot of nuclear material over central London or New York or something. That is only a threat if, in fact, radiation has a very serious effect on life. So the important question that I want to go back to all the time is, what is the effect of radiation on life? Do we know the answer to this question, and where are we going to get the answer from? Now, to get anywhere with this, we're going to need some measurements. We have to be able to measure radiation, and the radiation comes in a dose, and it's measured in millisieverts. Now, we don't have to know what that is. It's just comparing different kinds of millisieverts. And we're going to need dose rates. That is to say, how many millisieverts per day, or per year, or per month you have. Now, this is rather like if you get some paracetamol. It says on the packet, don't take more than 2 every 8 hours. That means if you do take 2, it will cure your headache. If you take 100, you better ring for the ambulance quickly and get you down to the hospital because you may be dead shortly afterwards. But you can have 100 paracetamol tablets over a period of a couple of months and cure a lot of persistent headaches with some advice from your doctor. That is nothing like so dangerous. So it's not just the dose, it's the dose rate, or the period over which that you receive that dose that is important. And the other thing that we're familiar with paracetamol, 100 tablets may kill you, but 2 tablets don't give a 2% chance of killing you. They're not likely to kill you at all. They're going to cure your headache and be a good thing. So things are not in proportion. And indeed, this is normal in biology that, and with drugs and so on, that the biological systems do not react in proportion. They are able to cope up to a certain stage, and then things start to go seriously wrong if you have very large doses. Right, so with millisieverts and the time over which you have the dose of millisieverts. Where are we going to find the answers to our questions? Who do we trust? It seems to me that almost universally, people, they don't trust estate agents, journalists, nor politicians, and all the rest of it. The people they trust are medical doctors. They trust their own medical doctor, not only because they have to, but because they frequently talk to him and build up some confidence. So it is important that radiation is used, nuclear radiation is used in medicine. And it's used for scans and also for therapy. And I'm going to talk about both of those. Sometimes the radiation is injected, the radioactivity is injected into you, and sometimes it's shone in from outside, both for scanning and for therapy. And there's not much difference between those two. They're rather similar. So here is what is called a positron emission tomography image of a patient, a patient at Oxford. And this patient has been injected with a dose of radioactivity, and the radioactivity has migrated to 2 places in particular. One is a tumour on their lung, and the other is that it's already started to accumulate in the bladder, where the body is getting rid of this material, which is foreign in the body. And of course, the body is continuously washing itself out with the things that we eat and drink and we breathe in and out. So the question is, what sort of dose did this patient receive? And the answer is about 10 millisieverts. It will all be gone in about 2 hours, both because the radioactivity decays and also because it will be excreted by going to the bladder and so on. Here, to change the language, I don't understand all of this, but I've had a Japanese doctor who sent it to me, who explained it. Here is a recent public poster for a PET scan, the kind we've just been looking at, and also a combined CT scan, which is shone into the body to image the organs inside. This is an expensive procedure. It's expensive for the people who answer this advertisement. Personally, I can't remember, that's yen, but anyway. And it's also supported by a public subsidy. The combined radiation dose from these 2 procedures is 15 millisieverts, and this is not for people who are suffering from anything. This is for a screening scan. So, obviously, people in Japan trust it and respond to this advertisement. In the meantime, the food regulations for contaminated meat from Fukushima, this is of the 27th of July 2011, the Japanese regulations on radioactive contaminated meat tell us, and I checked these numbers, that eating 1 kilogram of such meat with maximum radioactivity gives a dose of 0.008 millisieverts. Well, you can divide one by the other and see that this safe PET and CT scan is equivalent to eating 2,000 kilograms of dangerous meat in 4 months. Now, you couldn't eat, that's 2 tons, by the way, you couldn't eat 2 tons in 4 months, and even if you did, you would only get a dose which is as big as the PET CT scan. May I say that that is unreasonable? Meat destroyed at the time of Chernobyl, the same thing was true. Here is an article which appeared, a translation of an article, which appeared in the Swedish daily press 16 years after Chernobyl, at which the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority admitted that we condemned tons of meat unnecessarily. And 78% of all reindeer meat was destroyed at great cost to the taxpayer and temporary adversity to the reindeer herders. I mean, they lost their jobs and their livelihood and so on. And, well, you say, what, Sweden? Well, in fact, this the Director General of the Swedish is Lars-Erik Holm, who is also Chairman or Director General of the International Commission for Radiological Protection, who sets the level, which sets the level for all of these things, and it's to them I will be coming back to. So the problem was known about at Chernobyl. It was complete. There was a complete overreaction, and what has happened? The same problem has been repeated. But radiation is dangerous. This is the mortality of the workers, the initial workers at Chernobyl, who went and put out the initial fires. And these are the doses. You see, these are now in thousands of millisieverts. And this is the mortality going up this way. And you can see by the time you get above 4,000 millisieverts, you're meant to be looking at the crosses, really. The crosses show that 7 out of 21 in that dose band and 20 out of 21 died. So 4,000 millisieverts is exceedingly dangerous and likely to give rise to acute radiation syndrome, which is a medical condition in which essentially the body shuts down and you die within 5 or 6 weeks because the cells are unable to reproduce and split. However, below 2,000 millisieverts, out of 140, none died. The curve, incidentally, is, you can repeat this experiment for laboratory rats with many more rats and do it rather more carefully than doing it with humans, and you can see there's typically the same behavior for rats and for humans. So, but this 2,000 millisieverts, that's 100 times what was being given in the PET CT scan, so it's not surprising that this should be dangerous. You may be very surprised to learn that there are many people in this room, and indeed many of our friends and relatives, who have had much higher radiation doses than this. Anybody who's had radiotherapy will know that it's a very, well, apart from anything else, a very worrying and tedious business, because you have to go back to the hospital again and again and again, every day for 5-6 weeks. And I want to look at why and look at the radiation doses you get. Typically, in radiotherapy, you get about 2,000 millisieverts every day for 5 or 6 weeks. Now that's a colossal dose, and it's a high dose because, of course, the cells of the cancer tumour are to be killed. So perhaps it's not surprising that it's a high dose. And you can check, thanks to the internet, you can go onto the website of the Royal College of Radiologists and see the recommended doses that are prescribed for, not for palliative care, I'm not really talking about that, but for really curing the cancer. You can see these doses. So that doesn't sound too bad, because that's 2,000 millisieverts onto the tumour. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story, because in order to, this is a schematic diagram, there's the tumour that we want to deliver the radiation to, and it's sitting inside the body, which is the light grey region, and we've got to try and shine the radiation into this tumour. Unfortunately, an awful lot of it is absorbed on the way in, an awful lot of it goes too far, and a lot of it can also get scattered out sideways. And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of the radiation dose is spilled before it gets to the tumour. Here is a section for somebody being treated for prostate cancer, and it shows the radiation dose contours. Here is the treated region, the one with the star in it, which is where the prostate is, and this is the rectum, which is a very sensitive organ, and the patient is going to need this in the years ahead for a decent quality of life, and so the radiation dose is sculpted round that region in order to protect it as best it can. Unfortunately, these contours, let's look at the one of 50%, that shows that the 50% contour spreads way out into the body. This is a horizontal section through the bottom of the abdomen of the patient. So, if the tumour gets 2,000 millisieverts every day, there are healthy bits of the body which need to recover, which get 1,000 millisieverts every day. I don't want that here. 1,000 millisieverts every day for 5 to 6 weeks or for a month is in excess of 20,000 millisieverts a month. So that's 5 times the fatal dose that we saw from the workers at Chernobyl. How could this possibly be? Well, it works because the radiation damage caused by the radiation is repaired within hours. And in fact, in the lab, both with animals and with experiments in test tubes, it's possible to look at the way the DNA is repaired by the effect of enzymes and so on within hours, and certainly most of it is repaired before the next day when the next treatment takes place. So every day the healthy tissue has radiation from which it just manages to repair in time for the next day, and the tumour has so much that it just doesn't have time to repair. And by repeating this for 3, 4, and 5 and 6 weeks, there's a very good chance that the tumour will have died and the healthy tissue will still have taken a nasty knock, but it will still be there. However, and there are many ingenious mechanisms responsible for this repair, and I don't have time to go into them now. But together, even together, sometimes they fail. And when they fail, the result can be cancerous. In particular, a healthy immune system is one of the protection mechanisms, and as we get older, that immune system gets less effective and is more likely that the cancer will then occur. So typically cancers are much more common in the old than in the young, and these things come in long afterwards. Now, it's not possible to distinguish between the cancer which is caused by radiation and the cancer caused by, well, smoking and all the other unfortunate things that can happen in the life of a cell, which is responsible for things going wrong with its DNA and so on. And because we can't distinguish radiation cancers, to investigate this further, we need to look at very large groups of people, large populations, who have received large doses of radiation, and we need data on their lifelong health records so that we can see the difference, and then we need to compare those with a similar population who have not received a large radiation dose. Where on earth can we do that? You couldn't propose such an experiment, exposing a very large number of people to these sorts of levels of radiation. It wouldn't be acceptable. So it is, from this point of view alone, fortunate that we do have now 50 years of data from those who survived the Hiroshima and Nagasaki incidents. And we have those for over 50 years, in fact from 1950 to 2000, we have those records. It is certainly the largest imaginable experiment, and it involves the highest radiation doses we could imagine giving to people, and it's gone on for as long as we can possibly imagine. So one thing seems to me rather clear. If we cannot find a significant amount of cancer in this population, then it can't be terribly significant. Let's look at the data from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I should say, like everything I will show you, none of this stuff is mine, none of it's original. This is all out there in peer-reviewed, uncontested data on the internet that anybody can go look at, and in my book you can look up the references and go and have a look yourself. It's not very difficult. The known population of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the time of the incident was about 429,000. About 30%, a third of those people suffered early death or otherwise were lost, and we can assume that they perished. But the remaining two-thirds survived to 1950, since when decent records have been maintained of deaths and medical records. Of those, a significant number, about a third, actually have individually measured doses. I won't go into how you can do that, but it has been done in a number of ways, which have been improved over the years, and people have gone back over it in the latest improvement on that was in 2002, and this is where this data comes from. So, of those who survived to 1950, how many died of cancer between 1950 and 2000? And the answer was 32,057, which actually represents 7.47% of the whole pie diagram. So that's this yellow slice here. What was the extra incidence of cancer compared with people from neighbouring Japanese cities analysed in exactly the same way? And the answer is 0.44%, which is very small. But I personally I want to know a lot more about this. In particular, if this group of people, we would expect, since we know their doses of lot, we would expect that those who received higher doses should have higher rates, and those who had lower doses have lower rates. Otherwise, this wouldn't be believable. So this is a table in which each row represents a dose, a band of doses. And so the first two rows are for doses of less than 100 millisieverts. And then there are two columns. These are the number of actual cancers in 1950 to 2000. And these are the numbers you would expect from studying the people who lived in the other non-radiated cities. And by the time you come to the above 2,000 millisieverts, you can see that the effect of the radiation more or less doubles the rate of cancer. But as you go down in the table towards the smaller sources, the differences get progressively smaller. And below 100 millisieverts, the differences are very small indeed. In fact, they're statistically equivalent to or compatible with no effect at all. And anyway, the difference is smaller than about 4 per 1,000. Now, 6 per 1,000 is the chance of dying on the US roads from a road traffic accident in 50 years. So we're dealing with a risk here which is smaller than the effect of dying on the roads in the USA. Those are US figures in 50 years. So there's a line here at about 100 millisieverts. For radiations below that, it is not possible to say, on the basis of the data from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that people got extra cancers in that region. Let's look. We talk about the evacuation of people from Fukushima. This was set at 20 millisieverts per year. That radiation dose. So any regions which had gave an exposure to people of greater than 20 millisieverts per year were evacuated in principle, or at least that determined the regions. That means that the amount of radiation that a radiotherapy patient gets to the healthy parts of their body in a month, which is 20,000 millisieverts, is equivalent to 1,000 years at the edge of the evacuation zone. This is unreasonable, and people should go home. Evacuation is as traumatic, has traumatic effect on people's lives, quite as large as the effects of radiotherapy. You might call it socio-economic surgery. People who are evacuated suffer misery, depression, suicides. I've had confirmation of this from doctors in Japan. Their businesses go bust because they can't go to where their businesses are. The power plants are shut down. The effect of evacuations at Fukushima have been very serious indeed, and yet the level at which those decisions were made were unreasonable. What about Chernobyl? Well, again, evacuation at Chernobyl was on a similar basis. It has been reported by the International Atomic Energy Agency in 2006 and by the UN as recently as the 28th of February 2011, which is only just a few days before Fukushima, that this evacuation caused far more serious health damage than any radiation damage. But nobody's obviously read these reports, although they're all there on the internet and published. The lessons are not learnt, the error has been repeated. But the fear generated by nuclear radiation goes much further than that. For example, there's an important paper in the British Medical Journal which reported that there are more than 2,000 extra induced abortions in Greece, which is miles away from Chernobyl, as a result of the Chernobyl accident, because people were frightened. The trauma of labelling people victims and say you have been irradiated when they don't know quite what that means can be disastrous for people's lives. It's quite in line with the effect of a medieval curse of telling people that they are victims and they have been cursed. And depending on hopefully if their education is a bit better, they may ask some more questions, but unfortunately those questions don't seem to be being asked in Japan at the moment. It's well known in medicine that the placebo effect that everybody hears about, where you give a pill to somebody and tell them they're going to be cured when there's nothing in the pill except a bit of sugar, that works and they do get better. But the reverse, when you tell people that they may die and that they're cursed in that sense, that also works. It's called the nocebo effect. So things have gone seriously wrong. What is wrong and who is to blame? And then I will go on to what the radiation levels ought to be. All national safety regulations are based on advice from the International Commission on Radiological Protection, and that advice is at fault. And the radiation safety level that they prescribed is as low as reasonably achievable. So in order to reassure people, they have prescribed that radiation should be kept to a minimum. Regardless of whether that's safe or not, what we need is to ensure that radiation safety levels, the danger level, is as high as is relatively safe, where relatively means compared with the damage caused to people by, and as we have seen, these two approaches can give rise to a factor of about 1,000. Now I can see I'm already running rather short of time, so let me jump right forward to follow the advice of Florence Nightingale, who were all brought up to think of as wandering through the wards with a lamp and helping people in case they were dying. In fact, she was a rather distinguished statistician, and she used graphics, pictures, to explain to the politicians of the day how and why people were dying in the Crimean War. Let's do the same. What should the regulations say? Well, this is a plot in which I'm going to use the area to represent monthly doses. This is 40,000 millisieverts or something that kills the tumour, and we don't want to go there. This is 20,000 millisieverts per month, which is tolerated. I mean, members of the public come out of that and say thank you. This is 100 millisieverts per month, which is conservative by a factor of 200 compared with that. and that is what I've been suggesting as I go around as would be a sensible level of protection. Here, if you can see that as an area, is 1 millisievert per year, or 0.1 millisievert per month. Here you can see the factor of 1,000 between what seems to be justifiable and what the ICRP and the international regulations, and therefore the national regulations, are saying. So here is what I am recommending: 100 millisieverts maximum single dose. That's like a single impact of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 100 millisieverts maximum in any month, and 5,000 millisieverts maximum in your entire lifetime. These are very conservative figures, but they are 1,000 times more lenient and relaxed than the current figures. In summary and in conclusion, we live in challenging times, but we have brains and we should think and study. To survive economically and environmentally, we need to rethink many of our ideas, the supposition on which we base our lives, while maintaining public trust. And I think public trust is very, very important, and it needs to be regained. And in Japan, it's been lost. In many cases, this is very difficult, but my thesis this evening, is that it has, I believe, no downside. I think we should welcome nuclear technology and radiation into our lives, as we already do in medicine, where it cures thousands of cancers every week. Since I wrote my book, the tsunami in Japan killed more than 20,000, wrecked 4 nuclear reactors, but no one has died from radiation, and nobody will. When I say that, that's based on a calculation of looking at the radiation doses that people have received from the workers and comparing that with the cancer rates from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There will be none. In general, we should accept that in the 20th century, we were wrong to think of radiation as exceptionally dangerous. And we should now take up the challenge to educate, invest, and legislate for a new prosperity that includes nuclear technology. Thank you. Does this register?
The first question is that does the register of radiation register at all in the Royal Society of Edinburgh?
It takes a little time, of
right,
course, but it's 0.14 microsieverts per hour.
Come and sit down.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got
Keep it running.
We've got, and tell us please if it goes up. We've got time for questions. The usual things, there are microphones on either side. If you'd like to raise your hand, you want to ask a question, it's quite handy for the person answering the questions if you give your name, if you have a particular affiliation, say with a university department or something like that, to give that as well. So who would like to start the question?
Could I address the question of affiliation? I should say I have no connection with the nuclear industry whatsoever. I have looked at this purely from an academic point of view, and so I have no, I'm not pushing anything or anything, I'm just interested in studying it, and I don't like what I find.
Thank you very much. Who would like to ask the first question? At the back on the right, and then coming down to about 6 rows back on my left.
Thank you. I'm a physicist. I was intrigued by the fact that you seem to be able to measure, or people measure, the different doses received by different people after Hiroshima. How is that done, briefly?
Thank you.
I think that's a very important question. It's addressed in my book, not in detail, but by reference to publications on the subject. There are three answers to that. One is knowing exactly where the bomb detonated. One can calculate from a physics point of view how the radiation shone out from that point, how it was absorbed, where the person was, and therefore how much radiation they got. Secondly, in solids, which in this case means bones and teeth, when radiation shines, is absorbed in bones and teeth, it makes single electrons, which can be measured by electron spin resonance. If that means anything to you, probably will. You can measure the concentration of those electrons, and this represents a recorded history, which it seems it lasts for many decades, so that you can measure how much radiation that people have received, and then you can compare that and look at anomalies with where they were relative to where the detonation was. In addition, there are biological methods of looking at chromosome abnormalities, a process called FISH, which I have to say that I don't understand all of the details, but these have also been compared with the other two methods.
Thank you very much. There was a question here on my left. About 6 rows back it was. Yes, that's gentleman.
Ian Clement. It's just, did you ever in your book talk about hormesis?
That's a very interesting question. I should just say what hormesis is. Let's put it this way. If you want to remain fit and to run a mile, you might say, well, in order to run a mile, actually I'm going to sit in my comfy chair for 6 months and then I will have all the energy to run a mile. But biology doesn't work like that. Biology works by getting fit and used to the environment in which it's working. So in fact you do better to practice every day, do a little bit more every day, and so on. We're all familiar with that kind of argument. Does the same kind of thing happen with radiation? For instance, these protection mechanisms for cell biology, can you exercise them by giving people a little bit of radiation every day so that the protection mechanisms are exercised? Now, the answer is probably yes, but I don't think we want to go there yet, because I don't think public opinion is ready for the statement that radiation is good for you. So please may we put that on one side at this time. In 20 years' time, when we know a little more, I think we may be able to take that on board and relax our tolerances for radiation protection even further, but not yet.
Thank you. A question over on right halfway down, and then on my right, 3 rows in the back.
Hello, Simon speaking. At the beginning of your talk, you showed us the evolution of the atmospheric CO2 concentration curve, and you sort of placed your talk in the context of climate change. So you sort of implicitly suggested that we might turn to nuclear power to generate our energy and thereby reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, much of the energy use in the world is taking place in a less developed world, and the demand for energy there is going to increase as the distribution of wealth in the world becomes more equitable. So the nuclear power will have to be used there in countries where perhaps there isn't the expertise, the regulatory capacity, possibly, to manage nuclear power facilities. Does that cause you any concerns? And also, you didn't really say anything about the risks of nuclear proliferation.
Can I take the first question first, which again, I think it's an extremely good question. You will note that on my final slide I refer to education. It is absolutely essential, I think, that the third world learns about IT and communication of ideas and so on, and they have to be educated, and they may need a lot of help, as they do in a lot of other fields. And there may be places in the world which are not yet ripe for taking on nuclear technology, and it may take us 40, 50 years to do that in some places. But that certainly doesn't, I think, include China and India, where the levels of education are probably, and Brazil and Argentina and so on, those sort of places where I think it could be done. But I think your question is a very good one, my answer to that would be we need a lot more education and thought.
And the second question?
Nuclear proliferation. Well, why are you worried about nuclear proliferation? Nuclear weapons, if you actually let one off, create a very big and nasty bang and fire and so on. And that has always been as bad as we thought it was. The question of whether you're frightened of nuclear proliferation from the point of view of spreading radiation risks depends on what you think about the rest of the talk that I've given. And I would like to think that that isn't nearly as serious a worry. I mean, we don't have proliferation treaties on the provision of TNT and Semtex and so on. It's a problem, but it's not something that brings... we shouldn't be as serious about proliferation, perhaps, as we have been. But you're right, this is a further question that I do start to address in my book, but it involves politics as well as science. A heady mix.
Thank you. There's a question down here, but yes. About three, yes, and then two rows behind after that.
Professor Tony Trevelyan, University of Edinburgh. You mentioned the possible hormetic effects of radiation, and there is surely one way in which it can be examined. A lot of Scots live in granite houses, and if I remember, there was a release of radon from granite houses. There's also quite a lot of granite down in Cornwall. It seems to me that there must be a statistical way of examining whether there is increased health under these circumstances. And many years ago I did see a graph produced of lung cancer rates among smokers who lived in granite houses compared to those that didn't, showing they had a lower lung cancer rate. The argument being that radon was an alpha emitter, they were inhaling that, and that was irradiating their tubes before they really formed. Now, it does seem to me that there is a possibility of getting over to the public as someone it's healthier in a granite house because you're getting radon and you are getting radiation exposure throughout your lifetime and you're better off.
Again, I don't want to go that far. I think what is important is that the world statistics on radon, I should say the statistics on Devon and Cornwall and the Czech Republic and the Massif Central and places where there's high radon in the environment, and studying individual people and where they work and where they live and so on, did not show any correlation with the incidence of lung cancer. And you're absolutely right, because the radon goes into their lungs, you know exactly which cancer you're talking about, and you've got a very large population to look at, and people aren't frightened because they live there all their lives. So it's really rather quite clean kind of question to ask with high statistics, and it doesn't give the answers that the safety industry expect it to give, or indeed many of us thought that radon might be dangerous, but it isn't. But I'm not going to follow you in saying that it's good for you. But I would say, I mean, I have a house in Cornwall, and you all have houses in Scotland, and they're certainly very good for us.
West Aberdeenshire, I have to say, there was high levels of radon. There was a gentleman, but yes, with a red shirt, and then in the front row, and then over on my left.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Mr. Pointer, who's interested. Take you back to one of your earlier slides where you saying that to counter the one of the rationales for the fear factor was that the science of the case for nuclear energy was only known to Britons. And the case you're presenting is quite complex. A question, if you were invited onto the Today programme where you had that 30-second soundbite opportunity to convince the population of the case for nuclear, give us your 30-second soundbite.
Can I take more than 30 seconds? Well, I'm not going to worry about the time limit. I have been on the Today programme, actually, and they were very surprised with what I had to say, but I need to get on again. And a little step back from that, when I became convinced of this, I decided that I ought to be able to write a book which explained in simple terms what the pros and cons were without having any scientific background to appreciate it. And working with an Australian ABC journalist and my wife and my daughter, none of whom have any scientific background at all, I think I've got that far. But to put it all into a 30-second soundbite is hard.
Front row, and then 3 rows back.
Francis Hudson. If we went right back to your tale of Harriet and the matches,
yes.
There was another interpretation, and that is that it wasn't the matches that was the danger, it was the unholy combination of the child and the matches. So perhaps it's not that we don't distrust nuclear, we distrust the people, all the politicians, and if we got rid of all the people and the politicians, we'd be happy with nuclear.
Well, I am suggesting doing something about the people, and that is to educate them. And I think educate, not in the form which has been done so often in the past with things nuclear, of just telling people, you do this, you do that, this is dangerous, that isn't, but telling people why, and getting them to understand the reasons. That is which is a bit more sophisticated than a cautionary tale, but of course those cautionary tales were for children. But I think probably we do need to go back to the cautionary tale.
Thank you. On my microphone.
Isla Browning here. I'd just like to ask, how sustainable is nuclear power? How much uranium is available to mine to provide us with power in the future?
Let me say that I'm not going to give a quantitative answer. There are several things you should know. One is that there are other nuclear technologies, like the use of thorium, which are preferable in many ways. Thorium is 5 times as common in the Earth's crust as uranium. But even uranium, there are large supplies. Nobody's been looking for uranium, prospecting for uranium in the last 25 years because everybody had lost interest in it. So in the last recent times, the known supplies of uranium have in fact been rising, and of course it depends what the price of uranium is as to what is extractable and what isn't. Way down the road, 50 and 100 years from now, I have no doubt that we will have nuclear fusion, but that isn't what I was talking about. So I think the nuclear fission fuel problem is not insoluble. There are plenty of ways that it can and will be solved.
Thank you. We've got time for another 2 questions, I think. One was here in front, and then in the middle, near the back.
Hello, it's Victoria Crow. I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist. I found it quite a disturbing discussion this evening. And one of the things I would like to ask you is that you talk about 50 deaths at Chernobyl. Do you have statistics for all the childhood cancers and all the reoccurring cases of anemia, which are continuing, I believe, to this day?
I think neither I nor you, I think, have studied this in detail. I think the important thing is to actually look at what the UN reports and the World Health Organization reports and so on are saying, where it's pointed out that it's very difficult to be quite sure whether there were any cancers because of the overriding effect of this fear effect of telling people that they're sufferers and the health effects of that. However, you can take the cancer rates from Hiroshima and look at the doses that people got at Chernobyl and say, would you expect any of them to die from cancers? And the answer is no. And from Fukushima, it's certainly no, because the radiation doses are quite a lot lower. But you are right in the sense that it's quite difficult. I mean, the medics can distinguish the two situations in the sense that if people are simply depressed and their mental health is affected, but then they will show all sorts of symptoms across the board of a range which seems totally unrelated to radiation, and it's because they're depressed about the radiation. So doctors can distinguish, and in making their statement, the UN and the IAEA and the World Health Organization are looking at the spread of complaints that people have. They're genuine complaints, but they are in many cases apparently induced by people becoming afraid, losing confidence, smoking too much, family breakup, losing their homes, being evacuated and so on. It's a very messy situation, obviously, but the UN is quite clear that this mental, psychological damage has been the most important one. And the same thing is true in Fukushima now.
Last question, the gentleman's got his hand up about 4 rows from there.
Bill Roger, I've no vested interest in an energy background. Just if I could just quickly comment on that last question, my understanding is that the situation in Chernobyl was exacerbated by the handling by the Soviet authorities after the incident, rather than a lot to do with the incident itself, and that the procedures that were employed by the Japanese were well in advance of that, and that seems to be one of the differences. But my question really relates to this education manifesto that you're pushing for. I'm concerned that perhaps that's underestimating the nature of the problem in terms of implementing any changes which can be rationally based here. And really, I guess I'm asking whether you would go along with the view that suggested there were institutional barriers to doing that. And I'm thinking as much as anything about the large number of organisations which have been established to regulate the nuclear industry across the world. It's linked with the military and the very high specifications that you tend to get in that sort of context, and therefore the best of interest on the part of those authorities to resist any change, and these will be the people who will be looked to for advice on changing any safety levels.
Thank you. I think there's some very important points in there. I have two objectives. One is to talk to people who are not specialists and to to encourage people to think about radiation and to come to terms with the use of radiation in their own lives in a medical context and so on, and in smoke alarms. There's a radioactive source in every smoke alarm, and this sort of thing. The other job that I need to take on is to tackle the authorities. And there are a lot of vested interests, there are a lot of careers, there are a lot of jobs associated with the safety industry. And people are not, half of those, well, of all the people in the industry, about half of them keep their heads down when I start talking. Of the remainder, a quarter of them say, well, of course, you're absolutely right, but what are we going to do about it? And the other quarter try to defend their corner. And of course I listen carefully for anything that I may have missed, but I haven't been too impressed yet. But I have a very important job to do to try to get the regulations changed, and that's going to be a big battle because there are a lot of vested interests, as you implied, in this whole field. And of course all kinds of safety tend to be over-egged in our society, I think, but not all.
Thank you very much for all those questions.